businesses need stability. So having come forward with a set of these set of measures, I think you've got to follow through on them. You know, the extra debt we'll get through that will result from this is, it will be expensive, but it's not going to be ruinous. So we'll get through it. And what we want to see, and what Liz Truss's idea is, we grow the economy down the line. The economy will start to grow and pay for these tax cuts.
Hello and welcome to Chamber UK. Kwasi Kwarteng's first mini-budget this September has generated quite a bit of controversy, not to mention turbulence in the market. So I sat down with Conservative MP for the northern seat of Thirsk and Malton, Kevin Hollinrake. He took the chance to ask the Chancellor about whether he will reduce the deficit by cutting northern infrastructure spending. On Friday, the Chancellor made a statement outlining a number of tax cuts across the board. This includes cutting income tax by 1 percentage point from 20% to 19%. While this will directly positively impact hardworking families up and down the country, some have argued that some of the other changes may not. These include scrapping the limits on bankers' bonuses, scrapping the top rate of income tax, and scrapping the rise in corporation tax. Do you personally agree with this criticism?
Well, to some extent. I mean, they all have different purposes. So you target measures that you think are going to be most beneficial to the economy. Now, you can't expect every measure that you deploy to help everybody equally, but they all have a purpose. So I don't, in isolation, I don't have any problem at all with any individual one of the tax cuts. But I think my biggest concern is the impact on our ability to balance the books. That's the biggest difficulty here. You are effectively, I mean, we don't know the scale of this yet. It depends on energy prices going forwards, but you're talking hundreds of billions of pounds will be added to our national debt over the next few years at a time when we're already quite deep in debt. That's the number one problem I have. So we could talk about the individual measures, such as bankers' bonuses, which I think has been largely, what's the word to put it? It's, you know, I don't think it's right to say this is increasing the pay of bankers. It changes the way the bankers are being paid. At the moment, they have to have, because there's a cap, it doesn't mean they earn less. It means they have a much higher basic salary. And what this does is allow the payments of lower basic salaries, which many people would think that's not a bad idea, and have a higher element of performance-related pay. So that's what that's about. So we shouldn't fall for the headline with some of these measures, really.
So obviously, when Liz Truss was actually running in the leadership election, she said that the package of tax cuts she was going to make, she made clear that she was going to make these tax cuts. Were you surprised by the scale and the size of the tax cuts that she implemented, or that her Chancellor implemented on Friday?
Yes, I was, because they weren't restricted just to the stuff she talked about through the campaign, which I think is one of the problems with the budget, is that it went further. I think lots of people could argue the rising corporation tax was unhelpful. We want a low rate of corporation tax. It isn't really, the argument for that isn't really about what companies here already will pay. They'll largely pay what they're told. What it is, if you have a low rate of corporation tax, you're much more likely to get companies who are located elsewhere or are thinking of locating somewhere to come to the UK, which has to be a good thing. So there's certain arguments for that, and for the reversal of the planned rise for national insurance. So, but I think cutting the top rate of income tax, that kind of stuff, those were more surprising elements of the package, and added to some of the concerns that this would be unaffordable in the short term, so which would mean more borrowing, which would mean higher costs of borrowing and potentially higher interest rates, because it's going to fuel the economy to some extent, which I think has been borne out by in recent.
Yeah, well, just staying on that topic and staying on the topic of sort of the short-term impact of this mini budget, we've seen, as you've alluded to, the pound sort of tanking. You were a supporter of Rishi Sunak in the Conservative leadership election. Do you think that the criticism of Liz Truss's economic plans throughout the course of that leadership election has been proven correct by Sunak and his supporters?
Yeah, I think to some extent. I mean, it mainly. I mean, I don't agree that the pound's tanking. What you're seeing, it's been pretty stable today, and you're seeing a very strong dollar, which is me putting pressure on currencies around the world. If you compare the pound with the euro, with the Australian dollar, with the Canadian dollar, with the yen, it's pretty stable. So it hasn't been under pressure. But against the dollar, the strong dollar, it has, and there's particular reasons for that. But the other things, particularly, the concern was that it will fuel inflation. And the Bank of England has more or less said that, and that's what the markets are worried about now. We can see some of these mortgage rates being pulled, mortgage deals being pulled. It's because they're repricing them, and because interest rates are going to have to go up. And this was the worry: inflation would lead to higher interest rates, so which would have, yes, you're benefiting in one hand by you paying less tax. Some people are, but you're losing out in terms of money being taken from the other hand in the form of higher mortgage payments and higher rents potentially. So that's the problem, particularly around the tax element of the budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to what you were saying as well on the sort of the amount of borrowing that's been announced in the mini budget, there's also been sort of a wide and significant backlash to certain elements of the mini budget. What would you like to see happen now? Is there any sort of specific elements of that you'd like to see the Chancellor U-turn on? Or are there any other additional commitments you'd like to see him make to sort of improve the current situation?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't like to see a reversal of the measures. I think what we need, the number one thing that business needs, and private sector businesses drive the economy forward. Without private sector businesses, you have no economy. So the businesses need stability. So having come forward with these set of measures, I think you've got to follow through on them. The extra debt we'll get through that will result from this is, it will be expensive, but it's not going to be ruinous. So we'll get through it. And what we want to see, and what Liz Truss's idea is, we grow the economy down the line. The economy will start to grow, and we'll pay for these tax cuts. The sequencing is probably one of the questions around that, but nevertheless, so no, I'd like her to stay committed to what she's doing. I think we're, from a political perspective, I think we're still the right party to run the economy, and I think we'll be an election to decide who runs the economy in either 6 or 18 months' time, and I hope it'll be 18 months. So I think we'll win, but I think to reverse now would be a mistake, both in terms of for the economy and politically.
Well, one of the questions I wanted to ask after that was whether you'd consider wanting the Chancellor to actually consider his own position. But given what you've just said about market stability, I'd assume you probably want him to remain in place.
No, that'd be a massive overreaction. I mean, the thing is, there were some bells and whistles in the budget or the fiscal statement, but it was pretty much what Liz Truss had kind of talked about through the campaign. She was ultimately victorious in the campaign by a fair margin. So, and we live in a democracy. So for me to then I think would be churlish to then say, no, I don't like it, I'm not supporting that. I'm not asking the Chancellor to step down. I think it's important people like me, or backbenchers, government backbenchers, our job is to be critical friends to the government, and that's what I'll be. So in my role as member of the Treasury Select Committee and as a backbencher, I'll say what I think, as I did in the chamber after his statement. But it'll be measured criticism, and really trying to make sure that we don't do things that would then be short-termist and ultimately have a negative effect on the UK economy, particularly around backing off from levelling up, for example. And I worry that down the line, as I said in my question to the Chancellor after his statement, if we get to the point where we need to make spending cuts, just don't make them in terms of what we're going to invest in the North and the Midlands and elsewhere. That has to be that is a major priority. So that's one of the things I was concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just getting on to that as well, you were a keen supporter of the idea of a Northern Powerhouse. So that was a policy introduced by former Prime Minister David Cameron. Upon Theresa May's elevation to the top job, there was criticism that she dropped the government's commitment to the policy. Similarly, Boris Johnson introduced the levelling up strategy. Do you worry that Liz Truss may drop her government's commitment to levelling up?
Well, she said not. And again, one advantage of having a leadership contest in the midst of some difficult times was that all these matters were brought up as part of the public hustings, number of hustings and events where people could question the leadership candidates. And they both made a commitment to the Northern Powerhouse. Liz was very clear. Things like Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is very important, railway connection between east and west across the north, and many other projects she's committed to. So, and every question I've had, and I've been on with the Chancellor today, with other colleagues, and my question is the same. You are committed to the Northern Powerhouse. It's a long-term. It's got to be a long-term approach. It's got to be continued investment over a number of years, in fact, a number of decades. And I've received assurances time and time again that commitment is there. So, but I will trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan used to say.
Yes, absolutely. So are there any sort of specific commitments that you'd like the Chancellor or the Prime Minister to actually make for the North that they haven't so far? Is there anything further they could do or announce that you would like to see personally?
Well, I want to see the detail on Northern Powerhouse Rail. That's very, very important. And we expect a full fat version this time. We didn't get that last time, and that version has as well as the line that currently runs today between Leeds through Huddersfield to Manchester. This is a separate line that goes from Leeds to Bradford to Manchester. And that's very important because Bradford's very poorly connected by rail to those cities. And that would have this, what the economists call this agglomeration effect, connecting places together in a similar way that London is connected together, and how successful is that? So that's one of the key things I'm looking for. That kind of commitment, devolution across the north. Again, we've got my patch is in North Yorkshire. We've got a devolution deal, York and North Yorkshire region, elected Mayor 24, continued commitment towards that. There are things we want to see specific. I like the investment zones, and I've been calling for those for some time. So to encourage private sector investment in areas that need investment, and things, something called regional mutual banks, I'm a big fan of, which is a full-service bank that operates effectively as a not-for-profit. They do create surpluses, but they reinvest in the local economy in terms of businesses and pay savings to savers. But so I like to see a Yorkshire Regional Mutual Bank, for example. So there's some specific proposals like that we would like to see supported, that we're working together with the Treasury on now.
So just going back slightly to what you were saying, and I know that you've alluded to it as well, but the statement that you made following the Chancellor's mini budget on Friday, you asked him whether he'll be balancing the budget by cutting infrastructure investment in the North. The Chancellor replied by saying that his plan will cut the debt to GDP ratio in the medium term. Were you satisfied by his answer that he gave you in the chamber?
Yes, and he's committed not to doing that, but I think the concern I have, which I still have though, is that every Chancellor before him has caved into that. So, and what Chancellors find time and time again, I'm not just mean Conservative ones, every single Chancellor, every single Prime Minister is kind of committed to a levelling up strategy, probably have different names for it. And then we see the price tag and the long-term nature of the investment required, they think, well, that tends to span the political cycles, which means there are other priorities take precedence. So, but if we saw, I mean, the economic disparity in relative terms between London, the northeast, London, the southeast, and the northeast of England is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification, and that took 3 decades to narrow that gap. So we've got to be in for the long haul with this. So yes, encouraged by the commitment so far, and encouraged by the continued commitment to invest in infrastructure, but we need to make sure that actually happens.
So it's fair to say that there's been some opposition on the Conservative benches towards Liz Truss and the government. Obviously, from what you've been saying, it seems like you still have confidence in that. A couple of days ago, there were some reports that at least one of your colleagues had sent in a no confidence letter to the 1922 committee. Do you think that Truss and her government will be able to hold her government and the party together going forwards, especially considering that there's some opposition already?
I mean, Parliament's a rumour mill, and of course there are some people that may do something like that, and I can't speak for them, and I don't even know even if they exist. Nobody knows how many letters go into Graham Brady. There's not a public record of them, and he's very discreet. So some may have done, but I would doubt it. Actually, my instinct would be I'd be surprised if that happened. And I think it would be totally the wrong thing to do. I mean, the number one thing is, we are, as I said before, we are 6 or 18 months away from an election. To think we can somehow change our leader again and maintain confidence, the confidence of the British voting public, I think is for the birds, to be honest. So no, I think that would be a remarkably foolish thing to do. So I would urge all colleagues to sit behind the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. It doesn't mean you can't be challenging. It doesn't mean you can't raise points. It doesn't mean you can't speak your mind and raise your concerns. All those things are perfectly reasonable, but do it in a constructive way. And what the thing about politics and life in general, nobody quite knows all the answers. You might have an opinion, but Kwasi and Liz might be right. So if you don't agree with some of those things, well, that's fair enough. But there's no guarantee you're right. So yes, make your points, but then ultimately they're the ones that have got to make the big calls.
And as you say, it does seem like it is just maybe one MP, and it's only rumour at the minute anyway, so it doesn't seem like there are too many suggestions that this is a wider problem. But just staying on the topic of sort of opposition to the government at the minute, it does seem like the Conservatives are about 17 points behind in the polls, according to the latest YouGov poll. Of course, there is some give in that, and some of the polls have come back with slightly narrower, at sort of 12%. But do you believe that Kwarteng's budget is sort of partially responsible for this? And additionally, what do you think that Truss could do in the next sort of 2-ish years to help these numbers improve?
I don't believe the 17 points ahead. And I think that the poll of polls, which is the most accurate one, which kind of averages out the different polls, says that Labour are 10 points ahead. That was pre this weekend, so it may well be. Yes, I could see that, given the media commentary around this, which some of it is unfair. People are talking about run on Sterling, which is just not the case. So some people will be a little bit nervous about that. So it may well be we've lost a point or two over the weekend, but those are quite short-term things. So I think realistically we're something like 10 points behind, which isn't. It's a that's a challenge winning that back, but that's within the normal margins you would expect to see at this time of a parliament, particularly when you've got things like cost of living crisis that's having such an effect on households and businesses. So I don't think that's something we should ever feel is insurmountable. I think it's something that we can definitely make those gains back. We just need to do the right things over the next couple of years, and particularly the next few months, and start to win that confidence back. And that will be sensible management of the economy, of course, which I think the package in terms of energy bills is very significant. And lots of people you mentioned on lower incomes will benefit very, very significantly from that. And there's a proportion of their household income much higher than the wealthier households. And manage things like the Ukraine crisis and sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol, and just generally giving people confidence that we know how to run an economy effectively, and we also understand the day-to-day pressures on household budgets and help people get through it. And I think if we do that, we develop a reputation for calm competence, I think we're back in the game.
Brilliant. Well, we'll have to see what the Conservatives do to be able to improve this, and whether their numbers will improve in the coming months and up until the next election in a couple of years. Thank you for joining me, and I hope we'll get to speak again. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this crossover interview between TLDR News and Chamber UK. For more content like this, please like and subscribe.